Hello everybody, happy Friday. Oh, I'll wait for the RAF. Hopefully that's their last hurrah and they're going to disappear off up to Holyhead and we can get the rest of it done in relative peace and quiet. But of course it's been quiet all morning and now is the time that the RAF have decided that they are going to hurtle around the valleys around here, making huge amounts of noise. So hopefully we'll be able to get it done without too many interruptions, or I'll just have to shout very loudly to be heard over the top of the jets. But yeah, it's going to be one of those afternoons, I think. Right, I'm going to make a start because this is the last bit of dyeing I have got to do, and then I am finishing work for the weekend. We're going to have a barbecue tonight because it's a day of nice weather. It's lovely and warm here today. We are going to dye this month's seasonal changes collection. Actually, one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just pull the window to, because in addition to the RAF, everybody's also coming on holiday at the moment. So, there we go. Window's a really tight fit. So there's actually quite a lot of traffic as well. If I shut the door, that should be much better. Just means it gets a bit hot and stuffy in here, but I can cope for half an hour. Right, we are ready to dye this month's seasonal changes fibre. It was a really tight vote this time round, and not many of you voted. So remember, next time that I post about it, if you've got particularly strong feelings about which colour you want to win, do remember to leave a comment in the thread asking for which one do you prefer. And it was close between Dahlia and Beach Life, but as of the moment that I counted, Dahlia was in the lead by 1 vote. So that's what we're going for, which will be a nice change actually. We haven't got very many reddy, orangey, yellow colours. So if I show you on my phone, that's the colour palette roughly that we're going with creating. So lots of warms, yellows, oranges, nice tones like that. So it's the darkest colour that's in there, and I tend to start off with the darkest colour first and then progress my way through the lightest ones. Is this kind of magenta-y tone, and we grow really lovely dahlias in this garden, which I was surprised about. If we can get them past the slugs eating them stage, and they do really well in this garden, then we just lift the tubers come the first frost and put them into storage for the winter. So we're going to start off with our really intense magenta colour. So I'm going to start off with just pulling out some colours from my pre-mixed stock solutions that are on here to then measure them out more carefully. Where have I put the pen? There. Right, I was writing a list because the long-awaited dyeing workshop, I have actually made a start on trying to get it written. So if you're enjoying watching these and want something a little bit formal and a little less chaotic, there will be a full-on self-paced dyeing workshop that is getting ready to be launched sometime this autumn. So seasonal changes. Dahlia, and we're going to start off with the magenta colour. So we're doing 100 grams of fibre. Very roughly I want about 100 millilitres of dye for this, so I might just go with almost complete magenta for this one. So to make it a bit easier for you actually to see, I've reached out my clear jam jars rather than my fancy new jugs, so I'm going to go with just measuring out 1, 2, So sometimes I usually try and kind of put some more complex colours in it, but this magenta is such a nice, vibrant colour that I think is going to be pretty much bang on for what we want. So I might just leave that and not mess about with it too much. And I'll take a look at how it compares with the other shades later and see whether I want to add any other colours on it. But for now, we'll just write that down as just all of that colour and nothing else. The next darkest colour that we have got is this sort of fire engine orange, would be my kind of description of it. It's got quite a lot of yellow in it. It's quite vibrant and a good match for that. I do keep an orange dye just as a way of getting some really intense colours. It's not quite as powerful in colour as the magenta. So even though the magenta is going to be the darkest, I think what I'm going to do is I'm still going to aim for roughly 100 millilitres of dye for 100 grams of fibre on this one. So we're going to go for 1, 2, 3 of that. Now by itself, this orange is going to be a little bit excessive. Let me just show you what I mean about what kind of colour it looks like. It's not quite right tonally speaking. It's not far off, but it's kind of a bit aggressively fluorescent toned sometimes. It lacks a little bit of depth of colour. It's not a colour. I nearly always use it as a base for colour and then change it and alter it slightly. So I'm going to add 25 of my golden daffodil yellow. So you can see how that changes the colour slightly. And it doesn't change it by much, but it just makes it so that's the original colour, and that's it with just the addition of some daffodil, and it just makes it a little bit less aggressive, so to speak. I am going to also put in a tiny little bit of brown in there, so I don't need a full 25 millilitres. And if I was just dyeing the way I normally dye, which is by eye, I'd just go for, I'll put a splash of brown in it. But because I need to be able to repeat this to dye more packs again later in the month, I am going to measure it out. And I only want 5 millilitres, so that gets done using a syringe rather than a splash and dash method. So these are the progressions of our colours. So that's the orange by itself. That's the orange with the addition of the yellow, and then that's the orange with the addition of the brown. And what it's done is it's just made it into slightly less of a harsh colour, and a slightly better match for what we're trying to end up with. And if I pop it next to, let's pop the pink on there. So that's our magenta colour, just as it is straight out of the dye pot, and it's a really good match for what we're trying to go for in terms of colours. It's a little bit pinker. I'll look at it come the end. It has a tiny bit of brown also put into it just to deepen the colour slightly. We'll see how I feel about it. Okay, next colour along is going to be one that is going to be roughly our mid-tones. So we've got the magenta and we've got the orange. We're going to move along to the mid-tone colour, which is going to be a rich, warm, buttery golden yellow. Now, yellow as a dye is not visually very strong, so you always need more yellow than you do of other colours to end up with something of reasonable intensity. So even though this is a mid-tone, I'm actually going to use pretty much as much dye as I did with my dark tones, because I know the yellow doesn't look as strong I've now lost count. 1, 2, 3. I have to measure that out. Measure that out. Let's find an empty jug. That was only 3. 4. There's a problem with talking and doing at the same time if your brain disappears. So 100 of the golden yellow. Okay, just by itself, this isn't quite the colour that we're after for this palette. It's okay, but I know that as it dries and as it dyes, it loses some of that lovely golden butteriness. So actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I'm put some of the orange dye into it, and that warms it up a fraction, but not so much that it's going to turn it into something that is orange. So let's pull some of you off because I don't want the full 25 millilitres. Let's go for 10. Write it down before we forget. So you can see there, that's the yellow by itself. That's the yellow with just a little bit of warmer toned in it. So it's just made it that little bit warmer in colour, which is kind of the vibe that we are going for with this. Next two ones are going to be our pale yellows and our buttery yellow. Now what I'm actually going to do is when we look at these 3 yellow shades, if we're not careful, they end up looking visually far too similar. So what I'm actually going to do is this middle toned pale yellow, so the one that's by my finger there, I'm actually going to stick a little bit more greeny colour into it. So if we look at our inspiration picture, there's actually sort of quite a few green tones in there. None of those are represented in this palette. So I'm going to just up the green content ever so slightly. So for that purpose, we're actually going to use a different dye. We're going to use our lemon yellow, which is a more cool toned yellow. There's not vast differences between them, but when you're mixing up quite complicated colours, it can be quite helpful. This may not come across on the screen, but I'll show you anyway. So that's the golden yellow and that's the lemon yellow. So they're just slightly different in tone. You don't need to have both, but I keep both because I do so much dyeing that it's nice to have. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use an olive green dye that I keep as a really good basis for creating interesting colours around. It's quite useful for just making something a bit greener. And let's go for 3. So 50 lemon, 3 olive. Handwriting this is nearly impossible to read. And because this is less dye, it just needs a little bit of water to take it up to the same volume as everything else. And there we go. We can see how just by adding that tiny little bit of olive in there, we've just shifted it into something that's just a little bit greener than the original colour. And it's just going to give us that contrast between the golden yellow and this colour, which is a bit paler. And the final colour that we need is this very pale buttery yellow, which is this very one here. So this is going to be, it's almost our neutral. It's not going to be that different to the actual overall colour of the wool. So in order to make sure that it's properly pale, we need to make sure that we're really not using that much dye. It's quite a warm yellow, so I'm going to go back to using the daffodil colour, and we're going to go for 5 millilitres of that. So let's pull some there and just measure out the smaller amount. So we have got 5 there. Let's dilute it down with some water so that we can see what we're heading towards. There we go. So this is a little bit darker than it's going to be on the fibre once it's dry, but we've ended up with a colour that's quite nice and warm and quite nice and pale. So hopefully that's going to be our palette. And I'm now looking at the magenta and going, that isn't a satisfactory enough dark. So I did say I'll come back to it once I've mixed all the colours and see how I feel about it. And it might be that I add some other colours to it. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to just stick some brown in there just to tone it down, make it a little bit darker. And let's compare it with where we've ended up. Yeah, so that's going to be better at giving us an actual nice dark tone rather than anything else. So that's all our colours mixed up. They can go to one side. All the leftover bits and pieces will get reused later on. So let's grab cling film. Our fibre's been in soak since the morning, so it'll be nice and wet. Lay that out. We've squeezed out most of the water so it's only damp. Okay, let's get going. So the dye goes on the fibre, and then I'm just going to spread it round me. This is the way I really like to dye semi-solids because it gives really, really nice, good quality fibre to spin. You can kettle dye them and do higher water immersion methods, but I never find it makes the fibre, so it leaves you with poorer quality fibre than this low water method. So we're just aiming for ending up with an even looking spread of dye. It doesn't matter if it's not perfect because it's hand dyed fibre rather than commercially dyed. And then we're going to add our citric acid over the top. So as I say, I'm always getting asked about technicalities and bits and pieces of dyeing fibre, and there's not any really great resources to point people towards, I don't think. So I am finally sitting down with some free time that I'm getting this summer, because the new studio means it can be more efficient doing other things. And we're giving it a go at putting together a fibre dyeing workshop, so to speak, that you'll be able to work through completely at your own pace, and it'll have all the technical details that you need. So that's our next bit of cling film. So I'm going to leave these into, well, these will be heat set this afternoon, and then hopefully I'll get them rinsed before I finish for the afternoon. They'll hang up to dry. And they should be, because one of the benefits of the nice new studio is that I'm no longer dependent on using the dehumidifier to dry. It actually dries fibre much better than the old drying setup I had. It goes, I've got big airing racks up in the ceiling, and it should be dry for Monday, and I'll be able to get some photos taken together with the rest of the fibre that I've dyed this morning. And there'll be some nice new fibre in the shop, and there are also going to be gradient club spaces available at the beginning of next week. So it's been a while since I've had any gradient club spaces available, because a few people had to leave for various reasons, but I wanted to wait until after the new studio build was completely finished, because just to make sure that everything was all sorted and ready, and that I could go back to full-on production dyeing before I opened up to get the club back up to full capacity again. But everything is now sorted, so I'm gonna open up the spaces. I have yet to sit down and work out exactly what time and date it is, but if you get the email newsletter, you will be able to find out when that is. And you'll be able to sign up for that, which is good, because I always get people asking, oh, when can I join, when can I join? And the answer is, it's always limited. By how much fibre I can sustainably dye. Because what I don't want to do is end up usually if by the time I finish dyeing an entire club's worth of the fibre, I am really sick to death of those colours, because I've seen them all day, and then I have to see them to rinse them, and then I have to see them to pack them up, and by the end of it you start to hate your own work. So this is that warm golden yellow. It looks rather orange at the moment, but that's partly because it's wet and the way that it reflects the colour. It'll be slightly less Stego, but it'll give us a really nice pop of accent colour. So if anybody's not familiar, these are all dyed on Cambrian Wool. Cambrian is the name of the hills and the area of Wales to the south of Snowdonia, in Welsh. And it's actually, if you've ever heard like the Cambrian period in terms of not archaeology, because that's human history, rocks, geology, and ancient biology in terms of the development of species and things, it's a lot of those periods of time were actually named after the rocks in this area. So the Cambrian period was named after the Cambrian mountains, which are the hills. So Snowdonia is that way, Cambria is that way, because I am in the foothills of Snowdonia, but right on the southern edge of the national park. The house is just in the national park boundary. I can see the river which acts as the boundary. It's 500 metres away. And then basically as soon as you get out of Snowdonia and into the hills heading in towards Powys, and basically heading south until you get to the Brecon Beacons, those are the Cambrian mountains. Very few people live there. It's nearly all sheep farming, hills, rolling valleys, fast flowing streams. It's a beautiful part of the world, and it's not very well visited either. It's part of the dark skies area, because there's so little inhabitation in the area that you can get beautiful views of the night skies, the Milky Way. You kind of need to be on top of a hill though in order to be able to actually see the skies, because one of the issues that we have here is like, oh, The skies are beautifully dark. However, anything that's below about 35 degrees in the horizon, you can't see because it's blocked by a hill. But the Cambrian Mountains, and it used to be a CIC, but that structure is now changed slightly in order to be able to keep the project going. Somebody else has taken on the project, and anyway, long story. But it's they take the fleeces from the Wool Marketing Board and they pull out the very best quality fleeces that have come from the Cambrian Mountains. So they come from the Newtown sorting depot from the British Wool Marketing Board, and they take the fleeces from the blue-faced Leicesters crossed with the Welsh mountain sheep, and that's called a Welsh mule. And it's a different process. A mule is a crossbreed between a hill sheep and a blue-faced Leicester, and we get them all over the UK. And last colour. Yeah. And it's long, it's lustrous, it's beautiful to spin. It creates a nice durable yarn because it's so highly selected, you get a very long, even staple length. And that's one of the things you really need in order to be able to make a yarn really, really helpful for good even spinning and good durability. So you don't need to use huge amounts of twist to hold it together. So this is our last colour. So this is the palest yellow. It's just giving us a tiny hint of colour. We'll go for that's pretty evenly spread. Our citric acid to set the dye, because these are all acid dyes, which all that means is the dyes will only bond onto the protein fibres of the wool when the conditions are slightly acidic. So for that we use citric acid. Some people use vinegar, and you can use vinegar, but it really smells. And if you're spending all day doing it, the last thing you want is to be breathing in vinegar fumes. It's just not particularly great. So these are going to be our colours. So we've got our dark magenta, our warm toned orange, a sort of buttery golden yellow. This one won't be quite so vibrant once it's been dyed. A slightly lemony olivey colour, that's a green, and our very, very pale buttery yellow. So hopefully, unlike last month, I will have got the colours picked out almost exactly right. If not, then I go back and I re-dye the ones that I'm not particularly happy with. But they should be in the shop on Monday, ready to buy. There's already been a few bits gone up in the shop earlier this week, but I have also got in the process at the moment some more of the Corridale and Lotus base. So that brings us to an end of our dyeing session. These are going to get heat set before I rinse them. I hope you all have a very nice weekend, and I shall see you all and speak to you at some point in the future. Bye.